She's the better match for him. You'll understand someday. That's what my mother told me, right after I found out my sister was marrying the man I once loved. No apology, no explanation, just a smile and a ring on Melanie's finger. They erased me from the story like I'd never been part of it. Not just the wedding, not just the family plans, everything. But you can only be written out so many times before you pick up the pen yourself. If you've ever watched your own life play out in someone else's script, drop a 1 below. If not, hold on to that piece, because some betrayals don't explode. They whisper, with permission. So if you've ever felt like the quiet one, the forgotten one, stay with me. Let me tell you my story. There's a silence in this house that doesn't feel empty. It feels expectant, like it's waiting for me to fold. The kind of silence that hums, low and steady, under the clink of glasses and the soft tap of heels on hardwood. I stepped through the threshold with a careful breath, like I always did, holding something invisible inside me, something that might spill if I wasn't careful. The foyer hadn't changed. Same floral wallpaper, slightly faded at the corners. Same photograph of my parents on their wedding day, framed in silver and hung above the fireplace. Dad in his navy uniform, Mom in lace, both smiling like the world had never asked anything hard of them. Mom used to hum when she cooked Sunday dinners. Now it was quiet. Maybe that was my first clue. The kitchen, once the heart of this house, felt staged. Counters gleamed. The scent of pumpkin pie lingered, warm and spiced, but there was no warmth behind it. Just a performance. A script she'd memorized long ago. "Ellen, you're early," Mom said as she wiped her hands on a towel. Her voice was smooth, measured, like tea poured too neatly. "I thought I'd help," I replied, holding up a bag of groceries, her favorite wine, the kind I remembered she used to savor in the evenings. "That's thoughtful," she said. Then she handed me a stack of napkins. "You can fold these for the side table." I nodded, placed the wine on the counter, and got to work in silence. There was always a role for me to play. I just hadn't realized mine no longer included speaking lines. From the living room, I could hear Melanie's laugh. Bright, unfiltered, the sound of someone who's never doubted their welcome. She came bouncing into the room with that same energy, arms full of silk ribbons and wedding samples. "Desmond picked navy and ivory." Mom wanted to blush. "But you know how I feel about pastels." She didn't wait for a response, just kept talking, her excitement spilling over like champagne in a too-full glass. I smiled. I always did. That was my part. Big sister, supportive, gracious, the one who stepped back so others could shine. At the dinner table, the seats were labeled with calligraphy. I scanned for my name. It wasn't there. I checked again, carefully this time, but no Ellen, not even a placeholder. "Oh," Melanie said when she noticed. "You'll sit next to Uncle Ray. We didn't label everyone." Except they had. Everyone else had a tag, even Dad. I bit the inside of my cheek and nodded. The chicken smelled roasted just right, and the green beans glistened under butter, but everything tasted like paper. Over dessert, Mom leaned in and asked, "So, any news? Are you settling somewhere yet?" Her tone was light, like a question about the weather, but it struck the same nerve it always had. "I'm teaching part-time. I like it," I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's nice. Stability is important, you know." Judith always had a way of making encouragement sound like critique. Melanie began detailing her honeymoon plans. Italy, maybe Greece. Desmond had connections through his firm, she said. Mom beamed like she'd orchestrated the whole thing. "You always had good instincts," she told Melanie. You chose well. Later, I excused myself. My stomach wasn't queasy, just hollow. I passed the wall where the family pictures hung. I wasn't in most of them. The few I was in felt like accidents. The rain had started again, soft, misty, seeping into the porch cushions. I stepped outside to breathe. The air smelled like wet pine and the faint sweetness of the pie. For a moment, I let it fill my lungs. Then I saw him, Desmond. He was at the edge of the driveway, phone pressed to his ear. His back was to me, but I recognized the curve of his shoulders, the way he braced himself. He hung up, turned, and saw me. He looked away, quickly. I stepped back into the shadows. His eyes had avoided mine. Why? Some memories don't fade. They ferment. The cold of the morning hadn't lifted, and the wooden bench beneath the oak still carried a thin layer of dew. I wiped it with the sleeve of my sweater, watching the moisture cling like breath to a mirror. There used to be a swing here, long gone now. But sometimes my body remembered how to sway, even when the ropes were gone. I sat slowly, holding my coffee with both hands like it could anchor me to the moment. Desmond stood a few feet away, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes tracking the squirrel trails in the leaf mold rather than meeting mine. "I never thanked you," I said, "for coming to the hospital when Dad had that scare last year." His head tilted slightly, but he didn't look up. It was the right thing to do. "But not something you wanted to do?" I offered gently. A beat passed, then another. "Your mom asked. Melanie was out of town. Someone needed to drive." So that was the tone of it. Practical, dutiful. I let the silence stretch a little, hoping it would speak where words couldn't. "Desmond, can I ask you something and you not take it the wrong way?" He finally turned his eyes to me. They were tired, not cruel, not cold, just burdened. "I guess that depends on the question." "Why are you marrying Melanie?" A flicker of something, surprise, pain, crossed his face. He looked down again. She's what my mother would call steady, ambitious, practical." "You didn't answer me." He didn't, just rubbed his thumb against his palm, like trying to remove a stain. The conversation hit a wall, so I leaned back, letting my eyes trace the bare branches above us. The wind rattled through like breath between bones, and then I saw it. A small handkerchief tucked into the edge of the bench, white linen, embroidered with a delicate E. My breath caught. "Lillian gave me this," I said aloud, more to the wind than to Desmond. "Years ago, just before I left for college. Melanie got a necklace, but this was different." "You still have it?" he asked, unexpectedly gentle. "I didn't understand it then," I whispered. "She said I'd know when it mattered." Inside, Judith's voice rang out, calling my name like I'd wandered too far. I stood, tucking the cloth into my sleeve. Desmond gave me a small, unreadable nod and turned away toward the house. Back inside, warmth hit me like a lie. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and orange peel, but it felt staged, like one of those model homes you knew no one lived in. Judith handed me a stack of note cards. "These are the welcome words for Melanie's bridal toast. Could you rehearse them?" "I thought I wasn't given a toast." She smiled. "Oh, it won't be public. Just a practice run. She finds your voice calming." I held the cards but didn't look at them. My voice. My presence. Always a stand-in, never a spotlight. After she turned away, I went upstairs. My old bedroom had become a storage space. Dusty boxes, broken chairs, holiday wrapping paper from years ago. I moved past them toward the dresser. The framed photos once lining the wall, me in my graduation gown, me and Lillian at the lake, were gone. All that remained was a faded calendar from 2012 and a lamp missing its shade. That's when I noticed the drawer slightly ajar. Inside was a letter, yellowed but sealed. My name in Lillian's looping script. Not Melanie, just Ellen. I sat on the floor, back pressed against a box marked Xmas Lights, and held the envelope like it might vanish if I breathed too hard. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. You already know, and that's all I could read. My vision blurred. My throat tightened. I held the letter to my chest, letting the moment thrum in my bones. Have you ever found your name on something that proved you were once seen, only to realize how long you've been invisible since? If that quiet ache feels familiar, drop a number 7 in the comments. Let's see what came next. You don't notice when a house forgets you. It's in the small things, like a chair moved or your name missing from a list. The library hadn't changed much since I was a teenager. The same shelves Charles and I built together still stood, their dark wood slightly bowed under the weight of forgotten histories. The carpet smelled faintly of mothballs and lemon wax, and the windows let in a filtered gray light that made the whole room feel underwater. I stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching dust float through sunbeams that had broken past the clouds. A part of me hoped the house would recognize me, that some piece of its bones might shift and sigh, acknowledging I was still part of it. I walked in slowly and ran my hand along the edge of a shelf, trailing fingers over spines of books I'd once lined up in alphabetical order. My fingers paused on a familiar texture. It was a worn blue notebook, one of mine. From college, from the time I thought I could build something on my own. My throat tightened as I flipped through pages of half-sketched diagrams and notes written in all caps. Passion scrawled in pen. No one had mentioned it when I came home. I'd assumed everything had been cleared out, that my small rebellions had been filed away or tossed. But here it was, a ghost of who I had been. In the middle of the room, a low table held an open binder. I leaned down to look, mock-ups of the wedding invitation, Melanie's name, Desmond's name, and then nothing. No mention of me, not in the thank you note, not as a bridesmaid, not even in a footnote. I could have been the florist, for all it mattered. I sat down slowly in the leather chair by the window. Rain had started tapping against the glass in gentle, rhythmic insistence. I stared at the binder, then closed it with a quiet thud. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned my head slightly to see Melanie standing in the doorway, holding a mug with both hands. "Mom said you might be in here," she said, her voice too bright. I nodded, just remembering things. She smiled and walked in, setting the mug down on the edge of the desk like she belonged here, like I didn't. I didn't respond. She didn't stay long. When she left, I opened the small drawer under the desk. There, tucked inside, was a folded note. My name written on the outside in curling script. My breath caught. I opened it slowly, half expecting it to dissolve. "You already know." That was all I could read before my hands trembled too much to go on. My chest tightened with a mix of panic and knowing. Something buried, something I'd tried to forget. Downstairs, the murmur of voices grew louder. I tucked the letter into my sweater pocket. Charles found me there later, after dinner. He didn't knock, just stepped inside, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I found your project folder," I said. He nodded. "I kept it. Thought you might want it someday." "You never said." "I didn't know how," he replied. Then, after a pause, "You were never meant to stay small. I'm sorry we tried." I stared at him, trying to see if the words cost him anything. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture had softened. When he left, I turned back to the letter. I could still feel its weight in my pocket. My fingertips brushed the soft paper, like it might speak if I asked gently enough. That's when I saw the book on the desk. A different one, thicker. New. My name was on the spine, printed in neat black type. I opened it and realized it was my old business plan, but typeset and bound. And inside the front cover was a note in Desmond's handwriting. You always saw more than the rest of us. I never forgot that. I stayed there, alone, as the rain began to blur the windows into pools of gray. I could hear faint laughter from the dining room, Melanie's voice lifting over the clink of glasses and the confident murmur of Mom's instructions. That laugh used to mean something to me. Now it sounded like a door clicking shut. I ran my fingers over the words. Your voice will shake the ground if you dare to use it. This time, I didn't fold the letter. I let it stay open beside me, a small rebellion in a house that had grown used to forgetting. Some truths don't come crashing through the door. They sit across from you, smiling. The night before Melanie's engagement party, the living room glowed with a kind of curated warmth. Dim lamps, jazz humming low, the clink of wine glasses against porcelain. The fire in the hearth danced lazily, but the heat never reached my bones. I sat on the far edge of the sectional, sipping slowly, watching as the room carried on around me. I remembered something my grandmother once said. Sometimes betrayal isn't a rupture, it's a quiet arrangement everyone else agreed to. Judith leaned toward Melanie, their silhouettes softened by the firelight. I only heard it because I happened to be adjusting a lamp nearby. You'll fix what Ellen couldn't, she said. My hand froze on the lampshade. Melanie laughed lightly, as if the remark were a compliment. I'll try. The rest of the room blurred. I set my glass down and excused myself, stepping out onto the back veranda. The wood was damp beneath my slippers, and the cold bit through my sweater. But I needed air that didn't carry the scent of compromise. I didn't hear him approach. Desmond leaned against the railing beside me, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. Thought you might be out here. I didn't look at him. Did she tell you to check on me? No, he said. This one's on me. Silence stretched between us. The house behind us pulsed with music and wine laughter. You heard her, didn't you? I asked finally. Judith. I did. And? He exhaled. They told me to let you go, Ellen. I turned then, slowly. What? Years ago. Your parents sat me down, said I wasn't what they envisioned for you, that you were meant for more. I laughed, hollow and sharp. More? They thought Melanie, she needed someone steadier, someone who wouldn't question them. I took a step back, arms folded tight. So I was a placeholder, and she was the permanent hire. Desmond flinched. It wasn't like that. No? Then what was it like, Desmond? He didn't answer right away, just stared into the dark yard like it could absolve him. We were the plan once, you and me, he said finally. But plans change, or get changed for us. I remembered sitting in that same yard, years ago, the first time Desmond took my hand under the stars. No grand gesture, just warmth. He was the first person to say I was allowed to want something of my own. And now he stood beside me, soaked in someone else's choices. The fire crackled behind the glass door, and I suddenly felt like a ghost between rooms. I went back inside, brushing past him. The warmth of the room hit me like humidity, stifling. Judith raised her eyebrows as I entered. Everything all right? No, I said clearly, stepping forward until I stood in the center of the room. Melanie glanced up, confused. Charles was nursing a drink, his eyes darting to Judith. Did anyone ever think I'd have a say in my own life? I asked. My voice didn't tremble. It rang. Silence fell. Even the music seemed to hush. Then Judith set her glass down delicately. This is why we couldn't let you have him. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled, as if a secret too long held had finally been aired. As I stood in that silence, something ancient and trembling rose in my chest. Not rage. No, that would be too simple. What bloomed instead was grief. For the years I'd spent folding myself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping they'd find me palatable. For every time I'd mistaken tolerance for love. No one moved. Even Melanie's smile froze, flickering at the edges like a candle unsure of its flame. Charles cleared his throat, finally setting down his glass. We thought we were doing what was best, he said. For whom? I asked. Because I don't recall being consulted. Judith's gaze sharpened. You were always difficult to shape, Ellen. You pushed. I thought that's what you wanted. Someone with ambition. Vision. Not that kind, she replied quietly. Not the kind that forgets where she came from. I almost laughed again. You mean someone who forgets what you told her to forget? Outside, the wind picked up. The old oak branches groaned. Inside, no one spoke. I turned to Charles. Did you know? He nodded once, shame softening his posture. I didn't agree, but I didn't stop it either. That admission undid me more than Judith's logic ever could, because it meant someone should have stepped in, and didn't. I left the room, not with a slam or a scream, but with the quiet click of a door too familiar. In the hallway, I paused by the photo wall. Weddings, birthdays, holidays. My face was there, but blurred, cropped, marginal. Back in my room, I opened the letter again. The words burned clearer than ever. Your voice will shake the ground if you dare to use it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the fire low and my resolve rising. Some things, once spoken, cannot be put back, and I had only just begun. You can only be erased so many times before you start writing your own ending. The room I'd once called mine was barely that now. Cardboard boxes labeled Xmas, fragile, were stacked against the far wall, wreaths wrapped in plastic, a Santa figurine slumped sideways in a bin like he'd given up. I sat on the edge of the old twin bed, its comforter faded and a little dusty, watching light bleed through the blinds in soft winter stripes. I hadn't slept. Not really. There was a moment in the early morning hours when everything stilled inside me, not out of peace, but decision. No more explaining. No more folding myself into their shapes. I would not attend the engagement party. I would not sit through toasts that pretended the past hadn't happened. I pulled open the closet door and found an old storage box with my name written in my own handwriting, E.L. Keep. Inside, journals from college, a postcard from New York, ticket stubs from a jazz show Desmond and I once stumbled into during a summer trip. Beneath it all, a folded scarf, pale linen. The letter E is embroidered in soft blue thread. Ba Lillian's last gift. There was a knock. I turned just as Charles stepped in, holding a plain manila envelope. She asked me to give this to you when the time felt right, he said. I took it. Inside was a single-page will. My grandmother had left me at her home in Savannah. And co-ownership of a small gallery I barely remembered. She used to take me there during school breaks, always saying it would someday be mine, if I still believed in making things. At the bottom, in her handwriting, because you lived honestly and didn't choose the easy path. I held the paper against my chest, breathing in shallow pulls. It wasn't about the house or the gallery. It was about being seen, about someone older and long gone who'd noticed the quiet refusals I'd made all my life. I put the will beside the scarf and zipped my suitcase slowly. Everything that wasn't mine, I placed back into the boxes. Childhood ornaments, books with inscriptions not in my name, family photos where I stood off to the side. I kept only the scarf and a spiral-bound journal with the corners frayed. Melanie knocked without waiting and stepped in like it was still her house too. "You're packing?" "I am." She looked around, then perched on the edge of a bin. "Do you hate me?" I paused. "No." She waited for more, but I offered none. The truth sat between us like a third presence in the room. "If it were you," she said quietly, "what would you do?" "I wouldn't celebrate a lie," I replied. She nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding that the conversation had ended. She left without another word. Have you ever been asked to smile through someone else's version of the truth? That quiet moment when you choose honesty over harmony. If you've lived it, leave a 9 in the comments. Let's keep going. After Melanie left, I sat for a long time, unmoving. The silence in the room was heavier than it had ever been. Not oppressive, just full of everything I'd carried and never said. I reached into one of the bins labeled Lights Hallway and pulled out a tangle of green wire, remembering the year I'd tried to decorate the banister by myself. Charles had scolded me then, not because I'd done it wrong, but because I hadn't waited for Melanie. It was always like that. My initiatives, my choices, my steps forward. They only mattered when someone else could follow them. Alone, I was excessive. Together, I was a support act. I placed the lights gently back in the box and taped the top closed. On the shelf by the window, I found an old photo. Me, Charles, and Ba Lillian standing in front of the gallery in Savannah. I must have been 12. I was holding a paintbrush, and Ba was laughing. That gallery had been her world, a quiet space where art didn't need permission to exist. She'd always said, "What's honest doesn't need to shout." I sat back down on the edge of the bed, the photo in one hand, the journal in the other. The journal held dreams I no longer remembered writing, ideas for a nonprofit, sketches of a community center, rough drafts of articles I never pitched. I flipped through them like touching the ghost of a younger self. And still, I could hear Judith's voice downstairs, calm and composed, weaving the evening together like a spider with fragile silk. Melanie's laughter chimed in now and then. Charles remained mostly quiet, though I imagined he was pouring drinks and avoiding eye contact. I knew then that if I stayed, I would shrink again. Into silence, into a role already outlined. I would become the extra figure in the family photos, unnamed and unneeded. I zipped my suitcase fully and pulled on my coat. I stood at the window for a moment, watching frost cling to the edges of the glass. The smell of cinnamon and pine lingered from one of the opened boxes, faint reminders of a season that no longer held meaning here. There was no warmth in this house now, just legacy and choreography. I reached for the handle of my suitcase and stepped into the hallway. Judith's voice rang out behind me, sharp, but not loud. "You'll regret this, Ellen." I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say. Sometimes freedom doesn't feel like a cheer. It feels like a quiet room that finally belongs to you. The gallery smelled like pine and early ambition. Savannah's winter was milder than Charleston's, but the chill still crept through the open window I'd cracked just enough to let the morning in. The sun was barely up, dusting the wooden floorboards with pale light. A kettle whistled gently in the back, and the scent of mint tea, the kind my grandmother made when my world felt too loud, wrapped around me like a hush. I stood in the center of the gallery and looked up at the painting hanging on the front wall. Mine. For the first time, I signed with my real name, Ellen M. Carson. Not L, not initials, not a hidden watermark in the corner. It was there, bold, unashamed. The silence here was different. It wasn't expectant. It didn't press against my chest. It welcomed me. I spent the morning polishing the glass cases, sorting prints, and labeling each piece. Some of the work was new, abstract reflections of sound and silence, of closed doors and open windows. Some were older, revisited with new colors. All of it was mine, not filtered through anyone else's expectation or role. Just what I'd seen, what I still see. A knock startled me. The door creaked open, and a woman with short silver hair and a canvas tote stepped in. "Morning," she said. "You must be Ellen?" "That's me." She smiled warmly. "May Livingston. I live just across the square. Been watching this place sit empty for years. Glad someone finally brought it back to life." "Thank you," I said, unsure how to respond to kindness that asked for nothing in return. May looked at the central painting, then back at me. "That's your name up there?" "It is." "Good. It's a strong name, stands tall." She didn't stay long, just enough to buy a small print and leave a card inviting me to her book club. I slid it into my apron pocket and watched her disappear into the soft light. In the quiet that followed, I sat at the back desk and opened my laptop. The first blog post for the upcoming exhibit was half finished. I titled it, "The Voice Uninvited." I wrote about doors that closed and the ones I'd opened for myself. About the letter from my grandmother that still rested in my suitcase, creased but legible. About speaking aloud the stories that had only ever lived in margins. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Midway through, an email notification blinked. From Desmond. I hesitated, then clicked. I found the truth. "I'm sorry I helped hide it." That was all. No defense. No demand. Just an offering. I leaned back, breathing in the mint steam from my tea. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply nodded, as if he were here, and we were both too tired to lie anymore. By noon, I had finished curating the wall titled Unheard Rooms. I took a photo from outside. Me standing in front of the glass door, the gallery name behind me. I printed it as a postcard. On the back, I wrote in small block letters, "This is the ground I stand on." I slipped it into an envelope and addressed it to the old house in Charleston. No return address. The next morning, I opened the gallery early. The streets were quiet, painted gold with early sun. I adjusted a frame, then paused to sip tea and look out the window. A car pulled up. Black. Familiar. The engine stopped, but no one stepped out right away. I watched as the door opened slowly. A figure got out. Charles. He stood on the sidewalk, his hand resting on the roof of the car. For a moment, neither of us moved. The distance between us was filled with all the things we'd never said. And yet, I didn't flinch. If he came in, I would let him speak. If he didn't, I would turn back to my work. Either way, I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. The gallery remained still behind me. My painting hung quietly, but it wasn't silent. It had my name on it, my voice in it, my story at its center. And for the first time, that was enough. Some endings arrive not with finality, but with clarity. I've come to believe that the deepest betrayals are not the ones that scream, but the ones accepted in silence. Until one day, we choose not to accept them anymore. Family, I've learned, is not defined by who stays at the table, but by who sees you, even when you leave it. If my story touched something unspoken in you, perhaps take a moment to reflect on the silences in your own. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd be honored if you followed along. Thank you for listening. Until next time.